So I just should start by saying hello to everyone who's watching. And this is, I guess, what used to be our sort of Scribbles blog and Matt's film blog as well. But it's a long time since we've done anything like this. So we're just going to talk about film for a while. Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. End of the year, so always good.
It's our last day of term, which seems like a strange time and place to do one of these, but it is a look ahead to the summer, and it's also the announcement of an exciting new project that is going to stretch the meaning of the word exciting. But I suppose we can look back. How has your year been, both teaching film, but also your year of film? How's that been?
Teaching film's been really good. I think the new Year 12 students really engaged with the course really well, didn't they? And it's been quite interesting after everything that's happened with COVID and things like that. It feels like we're starting to get back to normal a little bit. So yeah, the teaching course has gone really well. And as for my year in film, I think it could be better. I think you start every year, they go, I want to watch so many films, but then life gets in the way and things like that. But in terms of films that I've seen, the ones I have seen, really enjoyed. I mean, it ended at the weekends with Indiana Jones, which we're sure we talk about, which was a bit of a disappointment. But other than that, as always, I'm going to improve next year and watch a lot more films, I think.
It's been a funny year for film. I think 2023 seems to have sort of crept up on us because it's been
Yeah,
relatively quiet, and then all of a sudden you look at the remainder of the year and there's a ton of things ahead,
yeah,
and it's going to be an exciting second half to the year. So this is
yeah,
really going to be a sort of summer preview of things that maybe our students might want to look out for and get into the cinema for.
yeah.
Obviously our film students will be aware of these, but these are our thoughts on a summer of essentially a summer of blockbusters. Am I
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were talking off camera earlier that it's interesting to see so many huge budget films coming out within such a short space of time. But like with the type of directors who are getting these massive budgets, it's actually quite exciting. And I think that's why maybe I haven't watched as many films in the first half of the year because, as you said, the second half of the year is so loaded with so many films. So it's really exciting. And I haven't looked. I can't remember a time recently where I've looked forward to so many cinema trips
Yeah.
in such a short space of time. So yeah, quite excited for it.
Well, we'll dive in then with the two films, I suppose, that are somewhat comparable in that probably one is the ancestor of the other. Uh,
Yeah,
and that's the Indiana Jones and the Dial of
yeah,
Destiny, the fifth Indiana Jones movie of what I'm loath to call a franchise, but it's a sequence of films that started in the 1980s. And we'll couple that with a film which is the eighth in what is almost certainly a franchise, the Mission Impossible films,
yeah.
which is Dead Reckoning Part 1, Mission Impossible Dead
Part one.
Reckoning one. So you've seen Indy.
Yeah,
We're both big Indiana Jones films, part of that kind of Lucasfilm heritage and
yeah.
sort of hangover from sort of Star Wars. And what's, for those who've never seen Indiana Jones films before, what is the appeal of them?
Um, well, if you listen to like Spielberg and Lucas, who are the progenitors of the character and nearly said the F word, then the franchise, but the stories, um, it goes back to the last Saturday matinee type of thing, doesn't it? But basically, it's about an archaeology professor who is an adventurer and he goes on adventures. I don't know, summer holidays or half terms, and he starts looking at archaeological sites, and he then encounters a lot of run-ins with the Nazis, doesn't he? So it's about getting important historical artifacts to the right place. And one of the things he's really concerned about is preserving things in a museum. But in terms of like film and what, if anyone who hasn't seen it can expect, it's just an old school romp, isn't it? A big action adventure, lots of fun, lots of great witty dialogue and one liners and things like that, and lots of just very charismatic people doing great things basically.
The origins is kind of mythologized, but there's this lovely story about George Lucas disappearing on holiday
Yeah,
straight after Star Wars came out to try and escape. He assumed it would fail, so he wanted to escape. And he's on a beach with his good friend Steven Spielberg, and they're
yeah.
building a sandcastle. But this being Lucas and Spielberg, this sandcastle is of colossal proportions. Like imagine a sandcastle being built by the kind of creators of blockbuster movies. And whilst
Yeah,
they're making this, apparently Lucas shares an idea for a film that he has been inspired by the James Bond movies,
Yeah.
by the fact that he loves the idea of a story that starts in media res, that you finish off the last story as you begin the next one.
Yeah.
But instead of it being a spy, this is an archaeologist in the 1930s, and the rest is history. You know, that's
Yeah.
the start of this. But they're fantastically exciting. They really carved out a blueprint for a lot of action films in the
Yeah.
80s. Which begs the question, why do they need to be revisited in 2023?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? And if anyone's got an answer outside of like money and nostalgia, then I didn't see it in the film. But I think, given like the way the industry is now and everything's sort of set up to create franchises or even universes, is that I think the studios seem to be trying to like reposition the 80s and 90s, like, as you're right, like text or like these series of films, and they're trying to reposition them for a modern audience when they weren't originally made for that audience, were they really? And yeah, I think it's just a very misguided, Disney in particular, a misguided approach to like using nostalgia and like intertextuality and things like that. And they just applied it to the wrong series of films, basically.
Yeah. So obviously this sort of lukewarm reception's not much of an endorsement. Is it still worth seeing at the big screen, or would you advise people to go and watch the first 3 on Disney Plus?
That's a hard question to answer because, as you said at the start, like, our generation, we grew up in these films, didn't we? And I've got a very soft spot for Lucasfilm as a studio. So seeing that the film is not doing very well financially, I feel like I should be saying, yeah, go and see it because it'll help the numbers. But what I'd also say is it's probably better waiting for Disney Plus or a streaming service, simply because the most jarring thing I found about it was the over reliance on CGI, like completely unnecessary. And I'm not talking about like the deep fake or the de-age and stuff, because I think if you're paying to see a film that that's got that in, then you sort of temper your expectation ever so slightly. But it was just really lazy uses of where you could tell like the Spielberg or older, older filmmakers would have done reshoots, or they would have went back and done pickups. In this case, they just fix it digitally. So I found myself constantly distracted between the moments where a shot on location are really engaging, and then it'll jump to either a fake background or something in the scene that was CGI that really take me out of it. So for the entire time watching the film, I found myself thinking about like the film craft, not the film itself.
Yeah.
So and to be honest, the first thing, because again, it took me dad, because when we grew up, we watched Indiana Jones all the time, so it was like a family thing. And I said to him, one of the first things I said when he came at the cinema is like, halfway through the film, I was just thinking I could be at home watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know what I mean? So yeah, wait till the streaming service. It's just, there's not enough there to justify the price of a cinema ticket. But I also, if we do keep paying for these things, it's almost like encouraging to make more, isn't it?
Do you know what part of what's put me off is the quite obvious references to the rest of the film series that I saw in the trailers, this kind of relentless nostalgic callbacks to previous films. And it's not that in of itself, because I don't mind a little bit of self-referentiality in a movie, but it's the fact that the original trilogy already did that, because these are films made by young men in their 20s back in 40 years ago. As you said, they were harking back to an era from when they were kids, so that already had nostalgia built in. In addition to that, the films were quite self-aware. They were always very tongue-in-cheek. There's a very famous outtake that remains in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first film, which was an improvised moment that Harrison Ford did when he had the flu and didn't want to perform some certain stunts. Anyway, that moment is referred to in the next film, Temple of Doom. So there's no need to keep calling back to that 40 years later. So that puts me off slightly. So we would endorse the original trilogy on Disney Plus. Do you have a favourite of the first 3?
It's a difficult one. Because I did watch them again last summer, actually, and I remember saying to you, I don't remember enjoying watching 3 films that much in a long time. They were so enjoyable. But personal favourite, I've always had Temple of Doom as like a special spot, because at the start of the film, one of the actors who says the famous line, "I go first, Indy," like his friend who's in the restaurant, he's actually a Liverpool-born actor. So there's that connection, but also that was the one I remember the most with me dad, like most quotable lines, "I go first, Indy," those type of things. So Temple of Doom, and I like that they went to And I was saying it's darker. It doesn't mean it's better, but they actually like it almost like experimented with some interesting ideas. So I think that is my favorite because it's the most interesting.
I love Last Crusade. Again, it's
Yeah,
I went with my entire family, including my younger brother, who had been really small at the time, and we saw
yeah,
it at the Empire Leicester Square, which was always a kind of special treat anyway. But there's
yeah,
again quotable lines and so many moments in those films. I mean, you know, look, they we could do a whole series on those movies in terms of the representations and how potentially problematic they are in some ways,
yeah,
but they are fantastic fun and a blueprint for amazing movies. And just
yeah.
remind me, who is it who produced those first three films?
Which individual person?
You know,
Oh, it's
there's
just probably someone no one's heard of called Kathleen Kennedy. Is that
Kathleen
what you
Kennedy.
mean?
Oh yeah, that's right. So before she ruined everyone else's childhood, she actually made a lot of other people's. So there
Yeah.
we go.
Actually,
Just
she made the childhood 2 ruined for all those people
yeah,
out there.
that's right. Just a reminder that
Yeah,
yeah, some of the best films, action films of the 80s, was produced by Kathleen
yeah.
Kennedy. But
But so
you know,
just one final point on this. I think one of the things after I came home, my wife asked me how did it go, like, what was the film like, and I just thought me overwhelming emotion was just like sadness more than anything else. And it's not sadness in seeing old Harrison Ford or seeing these characters you love being sort of not used properly. It was just the film just sort of embodied and represented a lot of things wrong with the industry. um, where you're right, those references and those jokes, they were throwaway moments in service of like developing characters and things like that. And now in Indy 4 and a lot of modern big blockbusters, the jokes is like that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else. Like, and so Indy 4 is basically just references to old films that were funnier and better, and also it was just like a lot of characters complaining for like 2.5 hours. Indy's complaining about being old. Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character is complaining about certain things as well, and it was really just I don't know, just it didn't have that when you watch Indiana Jones, when I watch them again, that if like I left the screen and just like uplifted and you're excited and things like that, and these ones are just it was just a drudgery,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, we mentioned how this obviously was hugely inspirational, and alluded to it at the beginning. But obviously, one series of films that's definitely left its impact on, particularly for the stunt work and the
Yeah,
adrenaline and this high octane, is this Mission Impossible series. And I know, obviously, this came out last weekend. I
yeah,
think it's right. I've not seen any reviews for it yet, but this is the kind of film that's review proof anyway, isn't it?
yeah.
What is the excitement over these movies? Why are you so excited about a film that's not quite as old as Indiana Jones, but on its sort of seventh, eighth outing now? You know, what is the
Yeah.
thing about Mission Impossible?
I think they approach franchises the right way, especially the modern Mission Impossible films they're all essentially following a relatively rigid formula, but there's always one or two elements that are different but also really exciting and really draw audiences in. And it's not just like the stunts, like the whole marketing campaign of this Mission Impossible film is the bike stunt.
Mm.
But I think it does it they remain true to what like Indy did in the 80s, and that they just are focused on story and the experience of the spectator being entertained, excited, and thrilled, and they don't. I think that's it. I know there's a lot, they don't like rely on nostalgia and references to other things because it's this self-contained thing, and I think just the power of like the sheer charisma of Tom Cruise carries it a lot of the way. Because I think they have been very inconsistent. I think the films, because the first Mission Impossible, that was like a real favorite of mine when it first came out in like 90s and things like that. The second one, awful. The third one, yeah, it's a decent action film. And then I didn't really pay attention until Fallout, and I've gone back and caught up a little bit, and they're just very engaging and exciting. And I think that's why it's actually about the characters and the thrill and the spectacle, not something else.
Yeah, and Fallout was the sort of, I think we discussed before, is a bit of a game changer for you when you were watching them, and sort of
Yeah,
remind you of them a bit more. And there, it is incredible sequences in that, and that sort of purity of storytelling. I was telling you the other day, it was on TV, obviously, as a part of the build up to this, and I was watching it with my dad, actually, funnily enough, but we had the sound down, and we
yeah,
were chatting and we had music on, but actually it worked perfectly fine as a silent movie. You could understand the story. There was no
yeah.
need for any kind of plot points to be explained. This is sort of visual, pure cinema in a visual sense.
Yeah.
Incredible.
I think that's a really good observation, actually, because that's something about indie. When I used the word like drudgery before, it was just like exhausting, not keeping up with the story, but there was just like so much talking, or it was just all exposition. So it felt like the entire structure of the film was 2 minutes of exposition, 5 minute action, 2 minute exposition, 5 minute action. You're right. So, it's made me, I said to you, it's made me a lot less interested in James Mangold as a filmmaker, but also a Star Wars project that's dead in the water as far as I'm concerned now. I hope to be pleasantly surprised, but I'm not really holding out any hope.
Definitely. So something to be excited about. Certainly, this will be one to see on the big screen, I imagine. But Tom Cruise does it again in continuing his mission to save cinema.
Yeah, that's it. And it turns out he's actually done it.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's strange that we talk, obviously, in our subjects, not just from that aesthetic or analysis of representations and film language and media language, but we look at the industry. And it sounds like when we say, "Oh, Tom Cruise saved cinema," that it's just a simple thing of he makes successful films. But he's actually a studio owner as well. He's carried on that tradition of an actor owning United Artists, which has always been in the hands of actors. How important is he beyond just the film, the role he plays in a movie? How important is he as a figure in Hollywood at the moment?
I think he's very important, isn't he? I mean, I saw it was like a candid like paparazzi shot or a little bit of video at a premiere recently, and like Spielberg walked up and hugged him, and you could hear him say in his ear that he saved cinema. So I think he's the type of person who seems obviously like obsessively driven, and given the amount of power and like wealth and the position he holds in the industry, I think give his personality, he can get these projects greenlit, and he does do these like extreme projects, and he can get other things done. So I think despite his personal life and things like that, he's probably quite a positive force in that sense in Hollywood. And because he's got so much cachet and so much power, it's that he can make things happen. You're like James Cameron or someone like that. They can they're those X factors that can get things over the line when maybe other people wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think from what I can tell, he's with like Top Gun in particular, he seems to have kept true to the core of the original and not tried to like modernize it for a modern audience. And I think some of the Disney films in particular maybe fallen afoul of that, unfortunately. Whereas, as I said earlier, he's just focused purely on the entertainment and spectacle of cinema primarily.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, there are only a handful of people that still have that kind of weight I suppose in an industry which is in some ways sort of shrinking in terms of studios and the clout that they have. One of this is the coolest segue you'll hear all week. So one of the few people that can do that, obviously, is our old mate Christopher Nolan, who was the subject of a series of 11 videos that we made a couple of years ago. But of course, this week coming sees the arrival of his 12th feature film, if you include the following, Oppenheimer, which is probably just as anticipated and highly weighted as anything he's ever made. So what do we know about Oppenheimer so far, and why are people so excited about the arrival of this film?
Okay, so Oppenheimer seems to be, based on interviews, he's talked about like a bit of a dream project he's had for quite a while in his mind. And it sounds quite interesting in terms of like the pre-production and the writing process, because it's an adaptation of a book about Oppenheimer, the guy who is credited with inventing the nuclear bomb or leading that particular operation, and it's based on a book called American Prometheus. And he said as he was writing it, he started to write the film in like first person, a very subjective approach, which is very unusual. So it seems like the film is split into two narratives, two narrative strands, one very subjective, one objective. And apparently Oppenheimer himself, played by Cillian Murphy, is in every single scene. So it's going to be really interesting to see how. I imagine the film is very intense because of that, because it's just one person's experience of these events. And for those who don't know anything about Oppenheimer, it's based about the creation of the nuclear weapon, which is, as the trailer line, Matt Damon says in the trailer, the most significant event that's ever happened in the history of the planet. So it's about the development of that, really.
This sounds like one of those stories that needs to be told. I think the significance of it being in Nolan's hands is a really interesting one. You know,
Yeah.
This a film on this subject matter to this scale has not been done, as far as I know, really.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking about this the other day, about what I look forward to kind of big films or films that you remember, you know, because this feels like it's shaping up to be that. But you know, an incredible film, I think, it falls into sort of one of three categories usually. One, that the film, it tells a significant story, if you like, something that was an important moment or a story that needs to be told. And in that, I'd put things like, you know, so Schindler's List is an obvious one to put in there.
Yeah.
You know, this was an incredible story. Or you have a story that's told in a really fascinating way, you know, like a movie maker. These are the things that we usually think about mostly with Nolan, don't we? You know, a sort of someone who brings something unique. Or if you go back, say Hitchcock, you know, a unique storyteller in the way he uses camera and uses narrative and stuff.
Yeah.
And the third, I suppose, is a sort of somewhere in between with those ideas. You know, either something that was an important story, or a combination of that, an incredible story with incredibly storytelling. So I would put sort of Star Wars and Spielberg's movies alongside those. You know, pure story, but unique and original direction. Would that be fair to say that Oppenheimer will be watching this and remembering it because of Christopher Nolan? Or do you think he'll be overshadowed by the fact that this is just a story from the 20th century that needed to be told?
It's a really interesting way of looking at it. I think the first thing I thought of was, I think the first thing in terms of the significance of what story is being told is who's making it. And you think about Nolan, he is like the premier like blockbuster auteur of our time, isn't he? So the fact that he is making it and dedicating so much time, and you know, Paramount dedicating so much finance to it, tells us that it's a significant story in its own right, and especially after Dunkirk, like we maybe associate this person with these big events now. And secondly, yeah, I think it's very timely, isn't it, the timing of the film, because obviously it's about the unleashing the potential of nuclear war and nuclear weapons upon humanity and the rest of us, and we're in a very tense, dangerous time living right now. So I think Nolan, it's almost like, I think other maybe lesser filmmakers or other filmmakers would maybe approach this in a bit more of a like traditional or a routine way. So there'd be some sort of messaging coded in there that's quite overt.
Yeah.
But I've got a feeling this is not going to be a film to preach the, you know, something specific about nuclear weapons. It's just about saying this is insanely significant and this is going to have an impact on the rest of humanity for as long as it exists. So I think he's definitely right in that perfect sweet spot, really, where the story has to be told. And I think it's what the right time, but also it's so important that it needs to be told in a way that is unique. And I think Nolan is almost like the only person who could pull this off.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that sort of almost abstaining from, you know, perhaps being on the nose with the messaging on this, because we talked in our series of reviews of his films about how sometimes there is a sort of an apolitical feel to Nolan's work. You know, he's not interested in necessarily ideological persuasion, if you like. Obviously, his films are ideological, but the fact that you can make, you know, sort of you can have that Batman trilogy without really leaning too much into the he's a hero or he's a fascist or whatever. But isn't this a subject where you can't remain apolitical? Where, you know, there has to, it's such a big thing, you know, such a significant moment that there has to be some sort of messaging behind it. Or do you think that it's actually it's such a big topic, it's taken as read that nuclear weapons not a good thing?
So when I say political, I mean, I'm talking, you know, broadly in the sense of left or right, or is it like a pro or anti-nuclear weapons thing? I think it's political in the sense that it'll deal with like the political or the literal impact on all of us, whether it's like literal impact of a potential war, like the psychological impact of just having this out in the world, knowing it's always there as a potential. But I think with Nolan, something's come up on Twitter recently, and like, you know, film Twitter and film discourse, is Nolan someone who promotes, like, you know, right-wing ideologies through like the Batman trilogy, and then other people say no, it's criticizing those things. But I just think a film like The Dark Knight, I think it just reflects a lot of the practices and attitudes of post 9/11 America and post war in Iraq. I don't think he necessarily, puts his flag in the ground and says, this is what I think about like the Patriots Act or whatever. I think he presents it as a tool, and he shows that it can be really negative, but ultimately it's used effectively in the film. So I think he presents the ideas, but I think he does give freedom to spectators to interpret them and take that meaning on their own.
I think that's fair. And I think you mentioned about the psychological impact as well, which reminded me again, it sort of suddenly reminded me of that number of themes that we used to run throughout that list of Nolan preoccupations that would inform each of these movies. One of which was, of course, a discussion of obsession. And this must lend itself to furthering that kind of to preoccupation alongside obviously discussions of masculinity. There's a sort of strong male presence in this movie from what I can tell, but also some significant female roles. And the other one we did discuss, of course, is that narrative devices. Nolan's sort of infamous for his playing around with narrative. And I remember when Dunkirk came out thinking, oh, this seems like maybe would that feel gimmicky if he was to play around with narrative with this? But he managed to achieve it with his 1 day, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week narrative device, which I absolutely loved and didn't see coming at all. That made it still feel, didn't feel disrespectful. Will there be narrative jiggery pokery with this, or is this too serious a subject to play around with?
I think it's all about execution, isn't it? I mean, I don't think anything is like by definition, cliched or anything like that. It's just depends how you use it. But I think as far as I can tell, I mean, in the trailer we've got color footage and black and white footage, so it does seem, and based on interviews, like he's hinting at something very similar to Memento, where the color sequences are Oppenheimer's subjective experience, and the black and white sequences seem to take the form of like committee hearings and things like that after the event. So you're going to have that subjective experience like constantly being juxtaposed with the more objective critique. So it'd be quite interesting, actually. You might have scenes where Oppenheimer's, either remembering or experiencing something from his point of view, but then we get like someone else who's in the room in the black and white sequence giving their perspective, which can change what we've just seen. So I think, given that this is such a contentious and such a complex issue, I think the subjective view is great, but then that objective point of view to correct a few things and guide our response, and maybe we might realize that Oppenheimer's a little bit unreliable as a narrator maybe at some point in the film. But I think his approach to narrative is going to suit the story given the complexity of the events. And I think this then opens up that, what we just talked about, this opens up that ability for us to make our own minds up and enables him to avoid doing a definitive message maybe.
Fantastic. So very exciting. We'll undoubtedly, add to our canon of work with another review of that. It arrives 21st of July. Absolutely see it on the biggest screen possible. The filming on IMAX is inevitable for that. And of course, if it rains this Friday, then you could spend the entire day in the cinema, because it coincides with the release of Barbie. Film about the toy Barbie, Mattel's doll that has been around since 1958, and but this is not going to be your toys turned into film or video games turned into film typical story. Why should someone who is just as interested in going to see Oppenheimer or Mission Impossible or any of the big movies, why should they go and see Barbie, do you think?
Well, the same reason I was interested. As soon as the film was announced, there's 2 words that made me instantly, I'm going to see this film, and it was Greta Gerwig. So I think the filmmaker. So I think knowing that as soon as Gerwig was announced as the writer in particular and director, you just knew this isn't going to be Emoji Movie or a vehicle to sell dolls. This is actually going to be something like a film with about Barbie and her place in society, etc. So I think. I'm hoping and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by like the depth the film is going to offer, actually.
Yeah, it's the marketing campaign has been fantastic, and it looks very funny as well. Ryan Gosling's involvement talks to it. Obviously, he doesn't take on anything, does he? I know it feels like Margot Robbie's in a lot at the moment, but she's a real power player in Hollywood herself. But you're right. The Greta Gerwig as a with coming from sort of indie filmmaking roots and sensibilities of kind of an ear for dialogue and character development is really exciting about this. And it's interesting. Its arrival on the screens the same day as I think Oppenheimer is a little bit misleading, although it introduces this. Do you know what? I cannot remember what it's called. It's got a name within the industry where you release counter-programming. Yeah, this is it. So counter-programming is where you release films that have very different audiences on the same day, so that actually you kind of get the other cinema-going public. So famously, I think films targeting a young female audience are often released on Super Bowl day, because they know that the guys will be in watching the Super Bowl and so on. But this is a bit more than just counter programming. There is something about releasing these films on the same day, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's many different takes and perspectives on this. I mean, what it just represents to me, and it's great, isn't it? How like each respective filmmaker and like the team behind each film have really embraced it, and they're not like being bitter about it. They really are embracing it. It's great, but it feels like a real celebration of like cinema, in the sense of cinema as in like these are real blockbusters, big budget films with great casting, great people behind them, that are going to be really entertaining. But they moved away from like the franchise stuff and all that type of stuff. So it feels like a strange inflection point, especially after watching Indiana Jones, thinking that's what Hollywood can, that's what they're doing. But Oppenheimer and Barbie represent the potential of what they could be doing every year. So it's really exciting, and I can't wait. But one thing I did read about the I don't know if this is a bit of a conspiracy theory, but the release is Warner Brothers set the date for Barbie's release on the same day as Oppenheimer, because Nolan was working for Warner Brothers, wasn't he? And then he switched over to Paramount Studios to do Oppenheimer. So there's some people in the industry apparently saying it's a bit of a backhanded attack on Nolan.
I think that would show incredible chutzpah from Warner Brothers to think that they whatever we release will go up against it. But what's lovely about this is that kind of organic arrival of Barbenheimer as an idea, and this kind of cross-marketing campaign that's just been created by people.
That's it. You're right, it does feel organic. And also, in a time now, we talk about this off camera, don't we, about like online film channels and film fans, and it's so divisive. Everything is so divisive before it's even produced. Even before, when it's announced, there's like negative videos being produced. So see something that shows like two completely different audiences coming together in a very organic, very genuine way is very encouraging, actually. So hopefully we have more of it. And I was thinking, actually, we should have a little competition to see if we, the rest of the year, can we find any more counter programming events. I saw a poster online for Wonkpolian. Willy Wonka and Napoleon. So so I wouldn't be surprised, the way the industry is, if we start to see more of this, like counter programming. But obviously, if it's done on purpose, it gets a bit cynical. But
yeah, that's right. It's a bit.
We're in a race against it.
Who?
Barbie! If this doll have a bomb, I know what it means. Fear it. Build a town, build it fast. Secret laboratory. Is anyone ever going to tell the truth
about the universe? What's going on?
I'm actually not sure. This is a matter of life and death. Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen.
That's happening, isn't it?
If this got out, this would be catastrophic!
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy
this doll?
World will remember this day. This is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world.
Well, just like Barbie, we've both had a costume change, and wanted to finish off this little video with the announcement of a new project. Now, people might be aware that we had a project a couple of years ago whereby we reviewed all of Christopher Nolan's movies leading up to the release of his film Tenet, and as we said before, we'll probably add Oppenheimer to that. But that was more of a kind of, I suppose, would that be fair to call that an auteur study that we did?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were looking at one director, but we did keep coming back to themes throughout his work, didn't we? So yeah, definitely an auteur study.
So I guess what we wanted to do this time, rather than repeat another auteur study, which is always interesting to do, but to take another, or to look at films from a different angle, and rather than looking at the director, this time we're going to look at a collection of film through the lens of the star of a film, a kind of star studies. Now, this is an interesting area of film, isn't it, Matt? Because even though I guess people have gone to the cinema and enjoy films because of their favorite movie stars, and have done since classical Hollywood cinema's arrival in the 1920s, it's not an area that has been put under like an academic microscope until relatively recently, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, Richard Dyer is the key theorist, isn't he? The main theorist on this one. But you're right. I mean, a lot of, especially what we study in our subjects, it focuses on industry or the text itself, and the role of film stars, not just as performers, but, you know, in terms of marketing and how they bring in audiences and things like that, is largely ignored, especially, you know, on the A-level courses. So it's really interesting, and it's quite exciting to actually hopefully learn a lot more myself.
I think one thing we learned from studying Nolan as well is that it actually enabled us to talk about other areas of film appreciation and film academia through him as a context. So whilst we, as you said, we talked about the themes of Nolan's movies and the preoccupations and his visual style, it also became a bigger discussion about genre and narrative and representations as well, didn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting about this new project, the Star Study, is that if we watch the films in a linear order, we'll be able to chart like the rise of a star and the creation of our actor's particular star status, which is almost like unique to them.
Yeah. And I know, of course, the big question that everybody will be wondering now that we've announced this is which particular movie star we've chosen. And this is probably going to surprise a few people. Some people may never have heard of this person, but he was a big star in the time that he was making films. And that particular actor is a guy called Patrick Swayze. Okay. And now this was chosen very deliberately, but I know this is someone that I suppose neither of us would say we are huge fans of, first of all. Is that fair in saying?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that intrigues me about doing the project on Swayze, is that, you know, I think he's an actor who holds a certain place, like culturally, because of certain roles he's done. So my knowledge sort of stops there, really. And I've seen some of the films we're going to watch, I've already seen, some I haven't. So I'm actually looking forward to getting to know his backstory and, you know, look at his films and see how his career developed quite a lot, actually.
Definitely. I think one of the reasons for, and I'm sure we'll cover this in enough detail, but one of the reasons choosing is undoubtedly he was a huge star in his time. He's someone that, you know, has that sort of status of sort of being iconic, but also I think he will enable us to talk about other issues, whether it's narrative, genre, representation through his movies, even a little bit. We may return to the auteur theory with some of the filmmakers he's worked with. Very intriguing. And he also crosses an interesting time in Hollywood from 80s to 90s, where we saw a sort of significant shifts in the way the industry worked, and be interesting to see if he was still making films today, what kind of movies he would be making.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to look at like the life cycle of a star, isn't it? Because I think there's certain stars who, and these are like the outliers, who maintain a career for multiple decades. And Swayze's an interesting character, isn't he? Because he was very big in the 80s and then early 90s, and then it started to drop off a little bit. And then before the end of his career, he started to move into like quite more interesting films and moving away from like the blockbuster or like the studio produced films. So it's really interesting to look at him as a as that star's life cycle. So
Yeah. So we will be reviewing or analyzing less movies than we did with the Christopher Nolan project. However, as Matt said, we'll have a look at these in a sort of chronological perspective, starting with I think the first film we'll be doing is Outsiders, which was I believe his kind of movie debut. He'd done TV beforehand, but most intriguingly, it was with the filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. So what an incredible director to work with on your first movie. And he was really as I understand it, the lead on that film. Which as soon as we start looking at it, we'll realise that just how many big names were in that movie before they were famous. So very exciting. We'll begin that I think in September when we return after our summer break. So for those of you who are going to be watching these, that's the star. So go ahead, go and watch some of his films if you've not watched his films before. Maybe even start predicting which of his catalogue you think we will be analysing and looking at, and maybe even make your own suggestions and recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because if anyone could give us suggestions, that'd be great. Because as I said, I'm not overly knowledgeable with Swayze, so I know his big pictures, but I've never seen The Outsider, for example. So I'm looking forward to seeing that for the first time, and I'm looking forward to in these projects finding like these hidden gems. So any recommendations be welcome.
Definitely, brilliant. Well, all that remains to be said then, I guess, is to wish everybody an incredible summer and to enjoy Barbenheimer. And you too, Matt, have a fantastic summer. And
you too.
We should a summer full of rainy days and lots of films.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I look forward to recording our review of both Barbie and Oppenheimer. So
yeah, definitely, it has to happen in one video as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right then. Well, for now, we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.